Last Pint Productions presents the New Way podcast. The New Way contains adult content, but since this is one of our special edition short episodes, we don't have time to record one of our comedic adult content warning masterpieces. I mean, we could have, in about the same amount of time it took to tell you we wouldn't, but we didn't. So there. Listener discretion is advised.
That was perfect.
Perfect. Mr. Wood, do you know anything about the art of film production?
Well, I like to think so.
That cardboard headstone tipped over. This graveyard is obviously phony.
Nobody will ever notice that. Filmmaking is not about the tiny details. It's about the big picture.
The big picture?
Yes.
Then how about when the policeman arrived in daylight, but now it's suddenly night?
Are you people insane? I'm the director.
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me. I'm naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Hello and welcome to a special edition of the New Way podcast where we break down pop culture so you don't have to. These are our shorter, more bite-sized episodes that will feature spotlights on things like actors, locations, actresses, directors, writers, all kinds of people behind the scenes and in front of the screens for you. We also, of course, are still on lockdown because of the coronavirus and practicing our social distancing. So we are not together in the same room tonight, but I am still holding things down in the Last Pint Production Studios. But I do have Ben Wilson and Nick Santa Croce on Zoom this time talking to us. How's it going, gentlemen?
You had me at bite size.
I no idea. Nick is on the Tron background. Is that Tron?
No, it's just a generic vaporwave looping video.
I've
1980s city.
I've never seen anything that looks more like the Proto Men than that background.
Yeah, that is heavily. Yeah, that is the aesthetic for Act 2. Father of Death.
Yeah, that is very, very
streaming on Spotify and Apple Music.
There you go. We've been having a really good time with these shorter episodes where we get to kind of just dig into one specific person.
Well,
right. Most of us have been having a good time, and most of us will continue to have a good time tonight. We are focusing on director Kathryn Bigelow, the first woman to win an Academy Award for directing, and I believe to win a Golden Globe for directing as well.
Not sure about that one.
But it's, she won for The Hurt Locker in 2008, and no female has won a acting director statue since, which is kind of crazy.
And I love her tea bags.
I don't know where that joke is coming from. I don't get
Matt,
it.
When we were sound checking, I wanted to make the Just the Bigelow David Lee Roth joke, and you didn't get that. And you don't know Bigelow brand tea?
No, that's a thing.
Available at your local grocer? Yeah, Bigelow. It's like a huge brand. It's like Coca-Cola.
I drink Bigelow every morning, but I just wanted you to kind of wait that joke out.
I've never heard of Bigelow. I'm sorry, I've never heard of Bigelow tea, but I'll be honest. I had a really fun time reading up on Kathryn Bigelow for this podcast because I didn't really know, she's a relatively small filmography, but it's pretty explosive. But her background is actually in art. She was kind of a starving artist, and there's some crazy things. I don't know if you guys know, I don't know if you went through her wiki or not, but she was briefly with Julian Schnabel, who directed Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And went on to be an acclaimed director himself. She also, I love that it says she was involved in a real estate deal with Philip Glass, which I thought was the funniest just single sentence in anyone's wiki that I've ever seen.
Wow, interesting.
But she had this big background as kind of this starving artist.
Were they going in on a target together? Or
I have no idea. I wanted more, but that's all. It was a failed real estate deal, whatever it was. So it apparently didn't go well.
Ethiopian restaurant.
So she winds up not really succeeding necessarily in the art world, and she enrolls in the graduate program at Columbia Film School and gets her master's there. At the same time, Milos Forman is teaching at Columbia, and she kind of gets on his radar, and she winds up, one of her thesis films that she worked on gets a little bit of play, and that sort of kicked off her career. And the film that did it was this 20-minute film where she literally had two actors, and it was an unknown Gary Busey was one of the actors at the time, and someone else she basically had them fist fight for the entirety of the shoot, and she edited it into this 20-minute deconstruction on violence in film, which has sort of become something that she's very known for as far as how she uses violence and kind of sometimes graphic violence in her movies and in her films, usually not glorifying it in any way. It's usually meant to be a little bit more kind of grounding on things. So it's kind of, I really thought it was interesting to see where she came from as a director. But
kind of like macho though, like kind of macho violence.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I think that the macho is sort of adopted by a lot of the viewers more so than it was her aesthetic necessarily, because I don't think that a lot of the movies that she made ended up being exactly what I can't speak for her, but I don't think she would have anticipated the response of a lot of them.
No, and I think, and we're
think about how many women directors currently exist now. If we looked at back when 7 years ago, Bigelow was like pretty much the only household name. I feel like we are tackling something like violence, which is just sort of the market's cornered by dudes making movies with gratuitous violence. That's got to mean something to her as a woman.
No, and
doing it a certain way, I think, is kind of tongue in cheek, especially in my favorite Kathryn Bigelow film, Point Break.
Of course. And listen, we're going to devote probably the last 15 minutes of this episode to Point Break, because I really do want to dig into that movie.
I didn't even want to get there. I didn't even want to mention the words.
There's a lot to get there to get through, but I definitely think there is I noticed kind of watching some of her things.
Gary Busey gets into a fist fight then too.
Yeah, I watched Detroit to prepare for this podcast, which was one I'd really been wanting to see of hers. And I'll get to that in a second. But I think she is very aware of how she is shooting things and how she is framing things, and there are choices she makes in her movies that make things feel very intimate and close and not objectifying. And I think it's kind of interesting that she's not. I agree with you, Ben. I don't think she at all is playing up these things. I think she is looking at them in a different way. I think people jumped off from what she's doing, and because what she does almost now looks like a parody. It to me, like, I rewatched Point Break and it felt like watching Burn After Reading. It felt like it was so aware of what it's doing.
One of the reasons why that happened, though, is you have to think about the fact that it became this macho movie in the 90s. And then it got parodied as a manly macho movie of the 90s so many times, to the point where it's such a it's a plot point in Hot Fuzz. I mean,
are you seriously
plot point?
Are you seriously saying that a movie about a bunch of surfers who rob banks wasn't innately fucking macho, but the audience made it a macho movie by parodying it?
No,
First off, but first off, you're throwing some snide. Now, I believe that when this director was posited, you were like, I have never seen a Kathryn Bigelow film. Is that correct?
I have not.
Let's get to Point Break. Let's kind of follow some of her other stuff first, because I think we'll have a lot of thoughts.
I still haven't seen a full Kathryn Bigelow film. I still have 15 minutes left of Point Break. Apparently, something big happens in the end.
Yeah, there is something big, and we're going to spoil it for you. But let's for just a second go back. I want to read this quote because it was so funny. I was reading this and I assumed this quote took place at a different time than it is. And you guys can guess. I'll ask you to guess when this quote was spoken by Kathryn Bigelow. But here's what she says. If there's specific resistance to women making movies, I just choose to ignore that as an obstacle for two reasons. I can't change my gender, and I refuse to stop making movies. It's irrelevant who or what directed a movie. The important thing is that you either respond to it or you don't. There should be more women directing. I think there's just not the awareness that it's really possible. It is. That quote is 30 years old. That is in 1990. Yeah. She is not even released Point Break, which would become her biggest grossing movie and really put her front and center on the map as a female director. This is also in what I like to call the Cameron years. She was married to James Cameron for 3 years, 1989 to 1991.
Well, they were together for longer than
they
that
were together before that, and a lot. Point Break has a lot of unwritten, uncredited work by Cameron and her on it, and Strange Days is 100% her and Cameron.
And also, The Abyss is 100% her and Cameron. And the whole point.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Of Ed Harris's, the whole thing of like him throwing the wedding ring. I mean, Cameron came out and said basically that was about his divorce with like him and Mary Mastrano's.
Mary Elizabeth
character.
Mastrantonio.
Yeah, Master Antonio, is Elizabeth Mastrantonio is that relationship was whatever. I'm butchering it, but that relationship was very like similar to their relationship.
Oh, that's crazy. That one I didn't. I like it. It's kind of amazing to watch them have like be in orbit against one another, and of course, famously, she beat out Cameron for Best Director in the year that he directed Avatar. Which at that point had kind of been largely thought to maybe be that, this opus that he was coming back, his first movie since Titanic, and he loses to his ex-wife, which is just phenomenally great irony in every way that you can possibly slice it. But like I said, her career is short, and we're going to kind of work almost backwards on these movies, I think.
We have to?
We don't have to. I just want to. I think Point Break is our end. End game is to talk about Point Break.
I do want to talk about After Dark, though.
Okay, absolutely, go for it.
So for those who have not seen it, After Dark is a 1987 vampire movie, and it's structured in a way where you essentially have this kind of innocent, basically, who is fighting against becoming a vampire, and it becomes kind of this struggle of wills, and where the vampires are sort of this strange, kind of group of people who are sort of culty. Does it sound like another movie to you?
Yeah, Let the Right One In.
Yeah, it sounds like another movie that came out about a year and a half later called The Lost Boys.
Oh, I was going to say Let the Right One In.
Well, no,
I was going to say Twilight.
Well, no. Nice. But it's insane how strongly The Lost Boys sort of took pop culture by storm, and how much it still has a stronghold. While I love The Lost Boys and I love what it does, and I think that it's a better movie structurally than After Dark is, it steals so much, both aesthetically and thematically, from After Dark, which came out 2 years prior to it.
Huh.
And I think I remember Schumacher saying in like this 1990 TV thing that he was like, "Oh yeah, we saw that and realized that you could make a serious vampire movie."
And I haven't seen it, but I was reading that it's widely lauded in the horror community as like a really underrated horror flick.
It's almost like a Western in a weird way, where you've kind of got this.
Well, that's what I don't know if you read that, but so she originally.
I've seen the movie
multiple
times.
I was saying no. So
did you read that article, Ben?
No.
Don't you lie to us?
No.
All I looked at in preparation was her IMDb page.
It's not at all where I was going. Not where I was going at all with any of that. And so I was just gonna say, one of the things they mentioned is that she originally envisioned it as a full-out Western, but they couldn't get the funding because that Westerns were failing. So she had to compromise and rewrite the script a bit, but it was always envisioned as a Western. So I thought it was kind of interesting that you picked up. I haven't seen it, so I don't know, but that's kind of cool.
Well, there's lots of like wide vistas with these, like a guy who's like trying to beat, the clock of the sun coming up, but it's shot magic hour. So he's like sprinting and like you see him burning, like as he's, it's just shot like a Western.
Nice.
Instead of high noon, the vampires had duels at low noon at midnight. It was magical. By the moon.
God. But no, it actually ends up being
all right, partner. I want to suck your blood.
It's got Bill Paxton in it.
It's not like that.
Well, that's how I see it in my head. So I don't know.
They're all they're all like steampunky and very like it's a very weird sort of off 80s thing. It actually kind of like aesthetically reminds me a lot of Strange Days. But it's actually there are moments in it that the Lost Boys just completely apes. And the Lost Boys came out 2 years later, and like I said, the Lost Boys ends up being a better movie altogether. But there's a reason why all these horror fans went back to After Dark and called it this kind of underrated masterpiece, because it does have a few long sequences that are really pretty, and they're done really well. Unfortunately, the acting is kind of bad in the movie.
And and I think that's kind of an interesting thing with Bigelow. I think she's earned better actors as she goes along. And we will get to Keanu in Point Break soon. But I think what's really amazing about Bigelow is one of the things, a lot of this was things I learned I didn't really kind of pick up as watching a lot of her stuff. And now I kind of want to go back. I know there's a movie that came out before Point Break called Blue Steel with Jamie Lee Curtis. It's supposed to be really, really good, kind of like
really ridiculously good looking.
Really, really ridiculously good looking. But Bigelow, very much like when we were talking about in our last director episode, Sam Raimi, invents all kinds of crazy camera rigs for her movies to pull off shots that she couldn't. And she's apparently like super well known for almost every one of her movies coming out with some rig that eventually winds up becoming sort of more commonplace.
Industry standard, yeah.
And that's kind of, I don't know that she, I don't know that a lot of people give her, I guess, enough credit for really being somewhat of a trailblazer on a lot of things. In how she shoots it, and that's what I was most interested in. So so we look at something like Strange Days, right? Strange Days does it as well. She created kind of this camera technique to show it's basically like virtual reality, but she wanted to mimic actual human sight. So they kind of worked with all of these different things that would seem hyper real. Now I know you're a Strange Days fan, Ben, correct?
I love it.
Yeah. It's a really great movie, and a great cast. It's Ray Fiennes. Who else is in Strange Days?
Angela Bassett, Juliette Lewis, Tom Sizemore. Yeah, I mean, Bassett, Vincent D'Onofrio.
Steve Gutenberg is not in it. D'Onofrio. Oh, Wincott from Michael Wincott from Robin Hood with a spoon cousin.
William Fichtner's in it.
I love me some William Fichtner. Did one of you say you have a connection to William Fichtner? Did I make that up?
That's Fichtner.
Someone I thought did. Strange Days. I think I watched that in. I want to say I was in college and it was on like the dorm TV a lot. So it's one of those I sadly never really kind of watched beginning to end. I've seen all the parts of it, but I've never actually watched it as a cohesive film. And it was it didn't do great. It was one of those kind of middling at the box office. It sort of took off a little bit after, but yeah, again, she's breaking out, and that's. But I guess there was also a lot of controversy over the film that people wanted to bash a female director, so they were largely saying that it was James Cameron's movie, and she just took all of James Cameron's ideas. I remember reading there was a lot of weird backlash about that, which is really shitty. Like, I mean, just really, really
not
shitty.
Unexpected at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And you kind of see that in her filmography. She's coming off a Point Break. She goes into Strange Days. She starts to kind of get a little bit bogged down. I saw The Weight of Water, actually, because I was a big Elizabeth Hurley fan. So
that's what I haven't seen.
I watched like every Elizabeth Hurley movie I get my hands on. And Sean Penn, Elizabeth Hurley. It's a messy movie. It's too many.
You know what?
Yeah.
You know what this means, Matt?
Yes.
We have to make the smell of water, and then we've covered the weight, the shape, the look of water. I guess is the only one we're left to make.
We're real close. We're real close on that one.
We can cast Steve Gutenberg.
Yes, sure. It's
That's
like
all I had to say, Matt.
That's fine. It's not great, and you notice that there are a lot of gaps kind of in her filmography, and then she comes back kind of to what is her wheelhouse with K-19, The Widowmaker.
A pretty underrated movie, actually.
It's and it's
Isn't
funny.
that a Steely Dan song?
Is it
K-19?
No, that's COVID-19, the Widowmaker, which could actually be a real thing right now. But
Oh, jeez.
no,
Too soon.
so K-19's a submarine movie.
It's so soon.
It's so soon.
I said it's so soon. We're not recording this in the same room. So.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So K-19's interesting because I like it. But I'm also not. I love The Hunt for the Red October. I don't love Das Boot. Nick's showing his watch, Tinder. There's some Tinder thing coming in on Nick's watch, and I'm going to put him on blast.
Supposed to announce.
I'm not going to. If you show it to me on
Be a
air, it's
professional.
going
Be a
on.
professional.
If you show it to me on air, it's
Soldier
going
on.
on air.
Soldier
I will
on.
not Dave Soldinger on. I will just continue to do what I do.
I'm gonna text him and just gave him a shout out. When is this gonna air?
I maybe never. No, so K-19 is kind of interesting because I remember reading. There's a really funny Roger Ebert review of it that basically is like it's a really competent submarine movie that goes down the exact same plot that every submarine movie has to. Like men are stuck on board, men are running out of oxygen, men are in danger of being hit by a giant torpedo. Will the torpedo impact the like cohesiveness of the ship? Will they run out of air? Who is the villain? And I'm like, oh yeah, you're kind of hampered with submarine stories, and there's only one path to follow. And you also
it's called the Das Boot model.
Yes, and you also have Harrison Ford as a Russian submarine pilot
Doing an almost or maybe similar, slightly competent Russian accent. Yeah, it's weird.
It's not bad. He's actually pretty. It was one of the last things he kind of seemed invested in.
Yeah. I liked his performance, and if you watch his like GQ, well, I know we've thrown out plenty of those like shouts at like the GQ, like break down your career things. He said that he like loved that experience and that he was really invested in that and thought the script was really good and that Kathryn was a fantastic director and blah blah blah. But yeah, I mean, he seemed like he really liked that experience, and I was like, well, you can kind of tell because he cares.
Yeah, he only shows up for shit he
trying.
cares about. But yeah, I dug that one. But so where she comes to after that, and it's 6 years before she gets to her next movie, which becomes her biggest film. Well, not her highest grossing, but probably her most. Well, I mean,
acclaimed
movie is The Hurt Locker, which I'm a really big fan of. The Hurt Locker.
It's a really beautiful movie, and it really established an aesthetic of modern warfare that I don't think had been done to that point. And like you said, Matt, where there were things that were done or little camera techniques that maybe she had, finessed in movies that other people took for granted. I swear to God, I've seen shots like, especially of like the dust coming off the ground, like with the explosions, the slow motion, all that sort of stuff. I'd never seen that in a movie before, and I've seen it in every war film since then. It's insane.
Yeah. No, it was
and good war films.
No, it's funny, and it was the opposite of. So you had Spielberg went the opposite way in Saving Private Ryan and sped up the film, so everything is happening in hyper real time, and hers is just this like dwelling on like this very moment of explosion, and which is great because the movie is all of these. Everything about these small moments, these things that they're tense over defusing the bomb, or they're in the sniper scene, which is I think one of the best scenes in that movie. It's just amazing, and again, her casting in that, she made Jeremy Renner a star.
She made Jeremy,
and he's a 40-year-old actor.
Been Hawkeye, he wouldn't have been anybody.
Yeah, he
has a career.
He was drowning. Like he was a 40-year-old guy who'd been on a boat. I'd seen him in things, but he just never stuck. She did it with that.
He was like the Michael Shannon. Him and Michael Shannon have super similar career trajectories where they got really big, great roles late in their careers. And
he focused on the shape of water, whereas Renner could focus on the smell. That's all I'm saying. He cast Renner.
It's not true. It's not true. No, I really, and that movie is also, to me, it's one of the ones I had to work on. Loyal listeners may remember I've talked a couple of times. I worked for this very bizarre editing company that would patch together movies and remove scenes in specific order so that they could play like different versions. So I was to do a Hurt Locker one that had no favorite.
This is my favorite job that you've ever had, and like describing it doesn't even do it justice. Like, before you finish the story, explain some of the other things that you had to do.
I'll explain it very quick. Yeah, I'll explain it very quickly. So the guy that ran this company, he had the patent on DVD chapter technology on DVDs. The idea that you could skip.
Good get.
You could skip to a certain point in a movie when you wanted to. And as such, because he owned the patent on that, he said, hey, what if I cut together movies where I'm skipping you through the movie, but I'm doing the cuts seamless so it looks like a new version of the movie that's done in a certain way. So, like, let's say you like Spider-Man, but you don't want to deal with all that Mary Jane nonsense and all the romance. You just want all the action of Spider-Man. I'm a
purist. I want Gwen Stacy.
I'm going to skip all of it. But he also had, what was so weird about it is it wasn't just like, I just skip every scene with Kirsten Dunst. I couldn't do that. The movie still had to make sense. And the cuts had to be seamless. You had to cut so perfect that it looked like that's how the movie was done. So you would have to agonize over like pop sounds, all these things. Like, oh, there's a pop in that one. You can't do it. And you would have to make the movie make sense. So like Mary Jane still had to be in it, but now she's just like, hey, Peter. And like now it's moved on to like another scene. All this shit. It was ridiculous. So the Hurt Locker, I go, what do you want to do?
Mary Jane was a Mary Sue.
Well, I'm like, what do you want to do with the Hurt Locker? And he goes, I want the bomb version. And I go, so just this, like the tense bomb. He goes, I don't want that shit with his family, with Evangeline Lilly back at home.
Oh my God.
I don't want that. I don't want all. And so like I had to recut it. And I remember I made this cut at the end that completely changed the end of the movie, and they were like so happy. They're like, that was great. You did it to where it doesn't even have to go to that thing. And go, this is awful.
I didn't hear a pop.
It's like, this is awful. My God. Like I really
desecrated the masterpiece.
I raped that movie bad, and it was terrible. So I've watched The Hurt Locker like 50 times.
I still remember when you got that job, and I was just like, what you do what? So what? How does that work?
Our friend Andrew worked there for like 6 years.
I know.
If they had the cameras running, that could be the next Tiger King on Netflix, like behind the scenes, the chapter technology.
Dude, you don't even know. The guy was also paranoid that people were going to steal his stuff, so you couldn't have cell phones in the building. You couldn't there was no internet. None of the computers had internet. Like it was nuts, man.
Yeah,
I think about that job a lot. But so I've seen The Hurt Locker a lot. And I really do.
You've seen parts of The Hurt Locker.
No, I had to watch the whole thing to know what I was cutting out. It was terrible.
No. Well, thanks to you, people have seen parts of
someone out there. One person watched my version of The Hurt Locker, and they're like, "Oh, he doesn't have a family. He just likes defusing bombs." And I'm like, "Yep, that's it."
It was good, I guess, man. Academy Award.
So then she follows that up with Zero Dark 30, which is also the coolest name for a movie I think that possibly exists at all. It should be a video game.
The irony of Zero Dark 30 is I had no interest in watching that. I was just like, why do you want to watch like an Osama bin Laden like movie a year and a half after like his assassination happened? And then I watched the movie and I was just like, fuck, it's a good movie. It's really good. It's so hard to hate that movie just because Jessica Chastain is so good.
Chastain's ridiculously good in that.
She's so ridiculously good in that movie. And then like the way they actually do the intelligence and they actually get to that point and the way they build tension, it's pretty phenomenal.
Well, and
so I have no hate for that movie.
I'm gonna also give this.
You didn't want to.
Go ahead.
You didn't want to watch it because it was so close to the actual assassination of Osama bin Laden? That's why you didn't want to see it? You thought it was too soon?
Well, it just seemed like it seemed like a cash grab.
Huh. Yeah, I can see that, I guess.
Well, and we have to give her a special credit on this movie.
Like all the 9/11 movies that came out like
like the Green Grass
years
shit
after 9/11. Like I didn't watch any of that shit because I was just like,
get what you're
bullshit.
saying.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to like our COVID-19 movie that's coming out next summer.
Oh, we're making it. We're making that one.
I'm watching it.
No, what?
And Matt, you got to cut out all the parts with the virus.
And this is where we Skype in Kathryn Bigelow.
Yay! No, I want to give her special credit. She was the first director to get Chris Pratt ripped for a movie and prove to Marvel that it could be done. And I'm not joking about that. He literally had to show James Gunn had to show Marvel footage from that movie because they're like, the guy from Parks and Rec, you want him to be what? Like, he's gonna take his shirt off in this movie?
So Bigelow basically is responsible for 2 Avengers.
This is true. This is 100% true.
I think Bigelow is actually responsible for a lot of adventures if you look at her filmography.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, and so then she.
I think she's partially responsible for Tony Stark.
She might be. No, I really was. This was the most fun I really have had in a long time, going kind of down the rabbit hole on a filmmaker. Because I really was just surprised at how much she really has done. And listen, are there more deserving female directors to win an Oscar? And should there be more? Yes, 100%. But I also, the more I read and the more I got into this, the more I was happy that Kathryn Bigelow did win the Oscar when she won the Oscar, and I think it's a deserved win.
Marshall.
Ben's don't you dare, Ben. Jesus,
now
Ben.
you look
of all the places I thought you'd go.
I could tell you a ton, man. Belatar.
No, there are a ton. I'm just saying I don't think it's not the worst. I think there are a lot of people that think that she was not deserving at all to win the Oscar. And I think, yes, there are others that deserve, but I think that Bigelow 100% has proven herself in this field. And and what I want to say next is, I think, even more important.
Patty Jenkins.
So I watched, I watched Detroit, which I don't know if either of you have seen Detroit.
I have not seen it. How is it?
Detroit floored me. And I was a mess. I watched last night. I was a wreck after watching it. And
nice.
This is going to be a very, I worry about how this is going to be interpreted when I say this, but I think Detroit should have gotten all of the love that Black Klansman got, and I think it earns it more. I think it is a harder movie to swallow. I think it doesn't rely on some of the humor and the more palatable things that Spike Lee did with Black Klansman. I understand this is a white woman directing something about the riots in Detroit and a race war, but I felt more watching this movie just from everything happening in the film, and she does some really smart things in it. She will, every so often, just for a couple of seconds, she will cut to actual news footage, but it's completely layered into the movie. So it's not like the sound changes or it's like you're watching a thing. She's literally just showing you scenes, and then every so often you're getting a glimpse of reality just kind of layered in on the movie, just like seamlessly put in and edited in. And it's
that's cool.
It put me in not a good place necessarily. But it's a really hard to watch movie, and I honestly I was trying to figure out why it did not get more acclaim, especially from the Academy, because I think it is a powerhouse movie, and I honestly think it is just too, you think about Zero Dark 30 and how that got a lot of flack for the torture scenes and a lot of that stuff. This is very much the same feel of realism of just shit. It is an uncomfortable movie to watch. Especially as a white person, it's an extremely uncomfortable movie to watch.
Wait, Matt, are you saying that the Academy doesn't award true artists?
I'm not. It's not what I'm saying.
Bite your tongue.
I was about to say, I was just like, that's the most Nick thing I've ever said.
No, it is. Honestly, you guys,
That was.
I really highly recommend you watch it. It is such a well done movie. The editing on it is. She got the editor from the guy that did Heat, and a lot of other really fucking phenomenal movies. It is a very calculated and well put together flick that really blew me out of the water.
So Matt,
wow, I will watch that this weekend.
Yeah.
So Matt, we are, we're assuming at some point we'll be able to go to a movie theater again. This year was supposed to be a huge, unprecedented year for female directors. not only in just getting work, but I think literally 5 out of the top 10 most anticipated blockbuster films are directed by women this year. What do you think? How much do they have Kathryn Bigelow to thank for that? You think?
Shit.
And the timing of her Oscar, because a couple years later, momentum really does start to ramp up once she wins that Oscar.
I mean, it's been 12 years.
I think a lot has to do with her and Patty Jenkins. I think together because
Jenkins is big.
Patty Jenkins basically was like, I made an Academy Award movie and I can make a high level action DC comic book movie. Whereas I consider, and has done a lot of great stuff in between. I think Bigelow has more of a consistent career, but also Bigelow is not she's not been a whore for her career. She's been typically making a movie every 3 or 4 years, besides one period in the early 90s. And so,
yeah, and I mean she's had some pretty major gaps. She's not working
I think specifically just the types of movies she tackled. And go back to the macho thing.
100%.
I think it's like, I'm going to do this movie.
We're about to get into it.
I'm the best person for this film, and it doesn't matter if I'm a man or woman. But she does kind of lean towards kind of masculine themes, which I think is really, really interesting when you talk about how deliberate of a filmmaker she is.
Yeah. No, and I think it really falls to her, kind of what she says. Like, it doesn't matter. It's compelling material. And listen, let's get into it. Let's get into Point Break. I think Point Break.
I am an FBI agent.
FBI agent.
Of course, I have the clip, Nick. How dare you? Of course, I have the clip. Point Break. So I rewatched Point Break as well. This week because I really wanted to see how it holds up, and I know Nick, you watched it for the first time tonight, but you haven't finished the movie, which is a little bit difficult to discuss.
I literally have 15 minutes,
and it's like an important 15 minutes.
I know.
But what did you think? What were your thoughts on this for the first time watching Point Break?
Well, first off, I want to thank Matt Shank for a generous grant. It was a serious flex to Venmo me $3.99 to watch this on Amazon Prime. Even though the last podcast I was able to, I rented Contagion with my own money. It's a major flex to finance my.
I wanted to make sure you watched this movie for the podcast.
Fair enough.
So which he didn't, because he missed the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to watch Hot Fuzz tonight because now I think I'm going to think it's that much better. You're so right about that. But yeah, it's a totally fun movie, and yeah, Keanu's real bad in it. But everyone else is really good. Like, I'm watching Swayze shoot scenery, and I'm seeing McGinley shoot scenery, and then I'm watching Busey shoot. I'm like, they're all really good in this. Keanu really was not, as much as it pains me to say so.
So my favorite thing to come out of Point Break, which I read about just today, and it is so genius and so amazing, and I want to see it so bad. But apparently, there is a theater show in LA.
No, I was going to tell you about this.
Oh, okay. You know about this. Go for it.
I was going to go.
Go for it.
How did you find out about this?
I was on the trivia for on IMDb.
Oh my God! So that is a huge thing here. It has been ongoing for years, and I've wanted to go. I had a
explain the premise.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. I'm setting up the story, Matt. Sort of hold your horses here. I'm gonna paint you a picture. I had a ticket to see it once and had to cancel and didn't end up going to see it, having, of course, never seen the movie.
Yeah.
Now that I've seen the movie, I am so glad I haven't seen the live show because, again, once we're allowed to be in the same room with the people, I'm going to do it. Their big gimmick with this live performance of Point Break, they had people literally suspended from ropes during the skydiving scene on stage. They interact with the audience. A lot of it's improv, but every performance they cast Keanu they cast Johnny Utah with a random person in the audience who reads all of his lines off of cue cards by assistants out off on the side of the stage. So all these readings, even if you're a good actor, are staggered and awkward because they're struggling to read it, and it's.
Do you know what they? Do you know what they say? What their goal is with that by doing that? The quote is they want to capture the rawness of Keanu's performance, which is so great. And listen, we are all lovers of Keanu at this point.
Here's the thing.
I would kill to see Ben do that. I would kill a man in cold blood.
Oh my god!
To see you get picked as Johnny Utah, like. Oh,
I wish I could throw a football that far. But anyways,
he plays a quarterback in multiple films too. I was thinking about that.
They played for Ohio State.
Yeah, he really did play for Ohio State.
Not both of them. Both of them played for Ohio State, and one
really?
one won a bowl game, got injured. One lost a bowl game, and lost.
Was
people
Keanu
money.
a quarterback? He was a real quarterback. Then,
No,
right?
he played hockey.
No.
Hockey and
yeah. Okay.
But I do think it's really funny. Anyways, I forgot. You guys interrupted me. I forgot my.
By the way,
I completely lost my train of thought.
By the way, the character Bodhisattva is also a Steely Dan song. I'd like to point that out as well.
No, so Point
Wow.
Break. First of all, so what she built for
Always
Point
back to
Break.
Steely's hands.
We talked about kind of the camera rig. So she built for Point Break basically like a pogo stick with a gimbal at the end, and they put a wire frame at the top of it so that the camera operator could have an idea of what would actually be in frame because he couldn't know. Because they have this chase scene where they're going through all of these like tight alleyways and behind houses and all this shit.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It was basically an extended Steadicam.
Yeah.
So the Steadicam was way far where the camera operator had no idea what was actually being seen, but they wanted to be able to actually track what was being seen without actually seeing.
And she used like a super
Because
light, like
think about it,
18-pound
like-
camera.
Today we can shoot on a GoPro right now that's stabilized, and then we can watch it live on an app that sends the live video via Bluetooth. But that's another thing I was thinking about in terms of cinematography and how influential she was. I'm watching this and I'm thinking they shot this on film, and this scene that is really well shot of all of them free falling in the air during a skydiving scene. And it looks so smooth and perfect. Now that scene would be infinitely easier to capture today, but I don't think that you film it any better today, even with the advent of new technology.
Also the fact that Patrick Swayze was a huge nut for jumping out of planes, so much so that they had to write his contract to not skydive on his days off, even though they were shooting scenes of him skydiving. Like that shot where he jumps out of the plane, like the Via con Dios, or See Another Life, Brother. Like that's him jumping out of a plane. And even after they gave him the thing, he's like, fuck it. He and his friends would just still go with the airfields and they would go skydive on days off.
Honestly, this whole movie, Point Break, another thing that I was thinking of when I was watching it is it feels like just whatever the actor did in real life, their character did.
Probably.
I'm pretty sure the original idea was just all these guys in ski masks, and the one guy on an off take does a Richard Nixon impression, and she's like, "Wait a minute, that's good. We can use that."
It's
and you
so awesome,
too, right?
though.
Oh my god!
That's how Keanu Reeves was discovered. He was just trying to surf somewhere.
Yeah.
Lori Petty dragged him up off the beach. It was just like, what the fuck?
There's so many little there's so many little like funny things in it though. Like the presidents die off.
Let Ben finish his joke.
The presidents die off in the order that they actually died in real life.
That's
awesome.
Like
they're like all of these little.
Really? I didn't know that.
They're like all of these tiny
great.
little
That's
things
great.
that are such like attention to detail, and they're also these ridiculous. Like, so I love John C. McGinley and I love Gary Busey in the movie. They're in a completely different movie at times when they're on screen. Like the dialogue is like zippier and quippier and weird, and all of these things happen. Like, but everyone in that, it's another case of everyone knows what they're doing and what their role is to like what they're playing in that movie, and they completely just nail it each time. But yeah, it is. There's some staggeringly good shots in that flick that I really was blown away by.
But I think that the real staying power of Point Break is just that machismo, like just the man, like male bondness, where it's just like, oh, like you're you do good at this, I do good at this, or whatever, and then they form this bond.
Do well.
And then they're off on this adventure or whatever. And so, but it's so funny how these like tensions mount or whatever, but still the scene where Keanu fires the gun up in the air, the one that's aped so often in Hot Buzz, which is like,
which is very dangerous. Like those bullets can come back down and kill somebody.
Of course they could. But he's like, I love this guy so much.
I love you, bro. It is the dude, bro, like bro. Inception. Bro. Like
it really is just like the pure pinnacle of like this male bondness of just being like, I love you so much, but we have to be men. So
don't sell our podcast short.
Another.
I was reading this like a review of this. Some magazine had like revisited the movie like a couple years ago, and they talked a lot about how like they really broke down the shot design in it and how very close all of the characters are in a lot of shots, and how like it wasn't like how they did in Top Gun where like the dude, like they talked about the female gaze in cinema and the male gaze in cinema and how that's used sometimes to objectify, sometimes not. They talk about how in Point Break, it's not like it's always like a full shot of the dude. Like it's Swayze and Keanu walking down there, and Swayze's like abs are out. And the woman that's writing this article goes, I have watched this movie with multiple men who just start giggling uncomfortably every time Swayze's abs are on view because they're uncomfortable about like what they're feeling during the scene. She goes, and it's not salacious at all. It's not. It's like, it's just like the way that they're using the movie is not how it's being interpreted on the other side of it, which I think is really kind of interesting.
I think all it shows is that a lot of guys are way more gay than they let on.
I think that's 100% correct as well. No, I think because they talked about that. I think that is Patrick Swayze's greatest accomplishment in life. Is he really was the actor to make people question what they were looking at as men. Because like this is coming off of Dirty Dancing.
Masculinity in film.
This coming off of Dirty Dancing, and then we go to this and we go to Roadhouse. Like Swayze's a confusing guy for people to watch if you're a meathead. Like
Roadhouse.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Roadhouse, was that a film?
I don't know. I heard it's a musical coming up soon.
Really?
You
say it's going to be a musical,
or already happened, but we'll see how these episodes get released. Anyway,
I don't know. Kurt Russell is the guy that made me think that way.
I always forget when we do these mini episodes that you're going to stagger them.
I do want to leave us on a couple of what ifs with Point Break.
Hey everyone, isn't it great that the coronavirus is gone?
Not that far in the future, Nick.
Okay.
It's not 2021 yet.
Not 2038 yet.
So I do want to leave us on some very interesting theorizing. So I was reading about the potential casting choices for Point Break, and there were ones that I understood in there, and it was also very interesting to look at how this movie was cast in 1991, where if this movie was made in 88, it would be like Stallone or Van Damme. It would be like a total meathead in it. But the 90s was very much the Keanu, the soft kind of pretty boy leads and stuff. So one of the casting choices they were going to think about, which I can't even imagine, was Johnny Depp. Well, Depp was on there. Depp I get. Depp makes complete sense to me. That movie would be about the same movie with Depp as it is with Keanu, for the most part. But Matthew Broderick as Johnny Utah is maybe the worst casting decision since Matthew Broderick in A Christmas Story, the musical. It is terrible. Terrible.
The heist is over. Go home.
I'm an FBI agent. I can't imagine it. Then she was also considering Willem Dafoe, who she had worked with before. And I'm like, I could see Willem as Bodhi.
I could see Willem as Bo, yeah.
Yeah, but Willem, like, I can't see Willem Dafoe as 25, no matter even when he was 25. Like, he's always just looked ancient to me.
I just want to see some Willem Dafoe abs.
He's got some great abs.
He's still got those great abs.
He's got some great abs. And the last thing
I hate it when I have a small joke in the pipe, and Matt takes it as an opportunity. He thinks I'm going to go on a long-winded joke, and he tries to take a
because
sip,
we don't know. We don't know.
You made a great joke, and we just doubled down on it.
Then my joke bombs because he's taking a sip of his brand.
We don't know. I never know, Nick, what's going to come out of
I rely here at the New Way. We don't have canned laughter. I rely on your positive reinforcement.
So
to tell our listeners what's fun.
I have one other thing to pose. I'm curious, Nick. Have you seen Heat? The movie Heat.
I know of Heat.
Okay, Ben, you've seen Heat. Heat comes out
45 times.
Heat comes
I'm
out.
The comedic relief.
Heat comes out 4 years after Point Break, but watching Point Break, I saw a shit ton of Heat. Like, I was really surprised that I guarantee that Michael Mann saw Point Break. Like, I find way too much with the California setting and everything. There's way too much crossover, including Tom Sizemore, who has the great cameo in Point Break.
Of the long lenses where the guys walk out, and it's like these long lenses of guys in outfits or whatever. No, and especially how quickly the violence breaks out. It's super
and no one
cool.
talks about that. I think that's kind of interesting. I think there's a big crossover.
I think that there's a quick transition there where Mann goes into documentary style, and it looks a lot more like assault style, stuff. But,
I'm not shaking my head at you. It was Nick was
I know.
filleting. I'm sorry, manually manipulating his microphone with his hand.
Oh, stop it!
Or he was doing a Doug Henning magic trick.
I agree with you, and I think that it's a good point.
All right,
I've never really thought of that point before, but
no, I really enjoyed watching that. I was kind of surprised that it held up really, really well. Keanu's Keanu, but the rest of it holds up pretty well. Anyways,
but hey, before we sign off, let's just say Keanu's Keanu, and he is obviously terrible in Point Break, and he's terrible in Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he's terrible in Chain Reaction. But once
Much Ado About Nothing,
once directors knew what to do with Keanu, which is when The Matrix came out, and they were like, "Oh, we can capitalize on the fact that he is just completely aimless and doesn't understand where he is or what he does." Then he could be coached.
This is the most.
You're
the biggest Keanu fan of all of us. That was the most damning. That was the most depressing, damning Keanu talk I've ever heard.
Just put Keanu in the bicycle helmet from the trailer to set to make sure he doesn't hurt himself.
Hey,
we'll have him repeat the words.
Besides Ethan Hunt, who was the best action film star of the last 10 years, and his name is John fucking Wick.
It's Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, but
John Wick's not a real person.
But at lunchtime, the director had to feed him with applesauce plain. He said, "Open up for the plane, Keanu."
First of all, I don't know if you watched the beginning of Point Break recently, Ben, but it's young John Wick in training on the course with the guns. That's where he learned it. Yeah,
I've seen it.
That's where he learned it. We want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of New Way. I really was. This is one of the most fun I've had actually learning about somebody that we're talking about on air that I didn't really know a whole ton about.
I learned a lot from you, Matt, and I'm sorry that I didn't do more
I
research.
learned it from you.
I didn't go that deep. I went mostly wiki and a couple other things, but still.
I knew all of the old stuff about her and James Cameron, but no, this is great.
Yeah, I just love that she stuck it to Cameron over Avatar. God, that makes me so happy.
What were you going to say, Nick?
Before we sign off, what was Keanu's job in Point Break again? I always forget his occupation.
He's his pretend one, or is he a...
I am an FBI agent!
There it is.
I could have the one where he just says, I'm a lawyer.
No, you know which one I want, goddammit.
his character's arc in that he supposedly went so we're supposed to believe probably he actually did go to law school.
No spoilies.
Oh, dude, you're gonna get to an emotional end. It's an emotional end. So you haven't. You have a lot of There's some good stuff that happens in the last 15 of that.
I know it's really ramping up. This is how much I care about the podcast. I turned off Point Break so I could record a podcast about Point Break.
I was hoping you'd have enough time.
I almost did it.
Well, I envy you watching it for the first time and learning the end of the story.
I envy watching the end.
Yes. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the New Way Podcast. We'll be back with more episodes soon. So, cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, my God. We all did it together. What a mitzvah. What a mitzvah.
Ben did not.
For the second time.
We did it together.